She was last seen alive, just a few hours after putting her children to bed, slipping into what should have been another peaceful night, when a wife mysteriously disappeared without a trace. The idyllic facade of family life quickly crumbled, revealing a darker reality. Just hours before her disappearance, there were strange phone calls and unexpected events that suggested something sinister was brewing. A secret phone, mysterious late-night activity, and conflicting accounts of that fateful night slowly bubbled to the surface. The investigation was complicated further by a lack of physical evidence, making it a challenging puzzle for authorities. What really happened on that fateful night? On the morning of October 30, 2011, Karen Swift's two young daughters, Ashley, age 9, and Key, age 6, awoke to find their mother missing from their home. The previous evening, Ashley had called her mother from a friend's house, where she was attending a Halloween sleepover party. Feeling ill and no longer wanting to stay, she asked her mother to pick her up. Karen, who had been at a Halloween gathering herself, drove over to collect Ashley, despite not initially planning to return home that night. By around 2 a.m., the mother and daughter had settled into bed together, ending what seemed to be a relatively uneventful evening. But when the girls woke up the next morning, Karen was gone. Ashley, who had fallen asleep beside her mother, was now with her younger sister Key in a different room. The girls had been moved during the night without waking, leaving a strange and unsettling gap in their memories. Even more troubling, Karen's white 2004 Nissan Murano was also missing. As the hours ticked by and no word came from Karen, concern began to mount. By 3 p.m. that afternoon, 2 separate calls were made to the Dyer County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. One call came from her husband, David Swift, who had been trying to locate her after phoning some of her friends with no luck. The second call was placed by 2 of those friends, Bill and Kathy Bona, after spotting Karen's car abandoned along Millsfield Highway, less than half a mile from the family's home. When deputies arrived on the scene, they found David Swift already there with the car. He had unlocked it and briefly searched inside, but found no sign of Karen's belongings. Her cell phone, purse, and keys were missing, and there were no immediate signs of struggle. A single rusty screw was found embedded in one of the tires, suggesting that Karen had run over the object, causing the flat. Neither Deputy Alexander nor Sergeant Walker, who soon arrived to assist, found anything obviously amiss within the vehicle. No blood, no broken glass, no indication that a violent act had occurred. A forensic examination by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, later confirmed the absence of any critical physical evidence inside the SUV. Deputy Sheriff Alexander noticed one unusual detail, however. As he prepared to move the car, he discovered that the driver's seat had been adjusted to a height that was comfortable for him. This was odd, considering that Karen Swift would likely have had to move the seat much closer to the steering wheel. This subtle clue immediately raised questions about whether Karen had been the last driver of the car. The search for Karen Swift commenced quickly, expanding out from the site where her car was discovered. In the vicinity of the vehicle, a pair of jeans and a shirt, later confirmed to belong to Karen, were found discarded. Inside the car, her Halloween costume from the party the previous night lay undisturbed. Her abandoned car was located mere minutes from the Swift home, yet there were no reports of anyone having seen her in the intervening hours after she returned with Ashley. Karen's husband, David, informed the police that he had last seen his wife around 2 a.m., when she came home with Ashley. He offered no other details about the night, except that Karen had filed for divorce just 3 weeks earlier. Despite the separation, the couple had continued to live together under the same roof to maintain a sense of normalcy for their 4 children, which included their 2 older sons, Preston and Dustin, from a previous period in their marriage. The Swifts had a complicated relationship. First married in 1989, Karen and David seemed like the quintessential small-town couple, eventually welcoming 2 boys into their family. In 1996, the relationship took a dramatic turn when David began an affair with a co-worker, a liaison that lasted 3 years and resulted in the birth of a child. Karen discovered her husband's infidelity when the child was born, and in 2000, she filed for divorce. The dissolution of their marriage seemed inevitable. But just as the ink dried on their divorce papers, a strange thing happened. The two began to reconcile, and later that same year, they remarried on the anniversary of their original wedding day. This turbulent history added complexity to the investigation, as detectives tried to piece together whether Karen's recent filing for divorce had reignited old tensions, or if other, darker forces were at play. Though David remained cooperative in the investigation, his past indiscretions and the timing of Karen's disappearance created an air of suspicion around him. Still, no hard evidence ever emerged to definitively tie him to his wife's fate. The second time around, after their reconciliation and remarriage, Karen and David Swift welcomed 2 more children, both girls, Ashley and Key. This seemed to mark a new chapter for the couple. But soon it would be Karen who stepped outside the boundaries of the marriage. She began an affair, flipping the narrative of their tumultuous relationship. In response to Karen's infidelity, David, taking control of the situation, decided that the family needed a fresh start. At that time, the family was living in Arkansas. David quit his job, quickly found another in manufacturing management in Dyersburg, Tennessee, and, without consulting Karen, purchased a new house. The decision to uproot the family was made swiftly, and so abruptly that their eldest son, Preston, was left behind to finish out the school year, while the rest of the family packed up and moved to their new home in Tennessee. The house was completely unfamiliar to Karen, who saw it for the first time when she was unloading boxes into it. Despite the sudden and unexpected relocation, Karen adapted to her new environment faster than one might have expected. Allegedly, David preferred that she not work, but the independent and outgoing Karen found ways to earn her own money. She began cleaning houses and doing landscaping work. Her passion for fitness also led her to start teaching aerobics classes, where she quickly became a fixture in her community. Karen's outgoing and cheerful nature helped her make new friends in Dyersburg. Those who knew her described her as a truly selfless person, someone who always put the needs and comfort of others ahead of her own, sometimes to her own detriment. However, despite her apparent strength and resilience, Karen's marriage was once again on rocky ground. The couple's reconciliation hadn't erased their past troubles, and soon it became clear that their relationship was heading for another divorce. Karen, though outwardly maintaining her upbeat demeanor, had become fearful of David's behavior. She confided in some friends about her concerns, mentioning that David had begun stalking her when she went out and would confront her when she spent time with her girlfriends. Nonetheless, Karen downplayed the severity of the situation. She often reassured her friends that there was no reason to be overly concerned. David's behavior was unpredictable, yes, but she told herself and others that she was probably exaggerating the danger in her mind. David's behavior during the investigation added to the growing unease surrounding Karen's disappearance. Following his phone call to report her missing, David met with police for questioning. He arrived with a set of crutches, explaining that a knee injury he had sustained earlier in the year had flared up again in the days leading up to Karen's disappearance. This injury would become a significant point of discussion later, raising questions about David's ability, or inability, to have been involved in Karen's disappearance in a more physical way. During his interview, David made a surprising revelation. He informed detectives that Karen had been using a second secret cell phone. He claimed that this phone had been given to her by Bill Bona, the husband of her friend Kathy. David didn't know the number of this phone, but suggested that its existence was evidence of Karen's secretive behavior. From there, David's account took on a darker tone. He implied that Karen's recent social life, particularly her association with the Bonas, had led her down a troubling path. He described her as a heavy drinker and a partier, seemingly intent on tarnishing her reputation. According to David, Karen's behavior had changed dramatically after their move to Dyersburg, and he blamed her new friends for this transformation. David told story after story about what he perceived as Karen's erratic and inappropriate behavior. One particularly bizarre tale involved him walking in on Karen naked in their hot tub. Another incident he recounted to detectives involved him finding Karen naked in bed with Kathy Bona. While these stories seemed intended to paint Karen in a negative light, the detectives grew increasingly frustrated with David's narrative, which seemed more focused on disparaging his wife than on helping them understand her disappearance. As the interview continued, the detectives attempted to refocus David's attention on the key question: Where could Karen have gone if she had left the house after he went to bed? David, rather than offering any concrete ideas, once again pointed the finger at Kathy Bona, claiming that Kathy had informed him that Karen's phone had pinged by the Mississippi River. According to David, this information had supposedly come from the police themselves, but there was no confirmation of this claim. His suggestion that Kathy had some inside knowledge of Karen's whereabouts only deepened the detective's suspicions about his evasive answers. When David finally left the police station, crutches in hand, he agreed to allow investigators into his home for a walkthrough. The search of the Swift home revealed nothing of immediate significance. There were no signs of foul play, no bloodstains, no broken furniture or anything to indicate a violent struggle had taken place. The house itself was somewhat untidy, particularly in the downstairs bedroom where Karen slept, but nothing was out of the ordinary for a household with young children. Like the forensic examination of Karen's car, the search of the home failed to provide any solid clues as to what had happened to Karen that night. While the walkthrough didn't yield any new evidence, the growing tension surrounding David's stories and the lack of concrete answers left detectives with more questions than answers. As the investigation progressed, David's attempts to control the narrative around Karen's life and disappearance would come under greater scrutiny. His quick judgment of Karen's new social circle and his focus on her behavior painted a stark contrast to the woman her friends described, someone who had always been caring, responsible, and devoted to her children, even amidst personal turmoil. While David's perspective offered one version of events, it left many wondering whether there was more to the story than what he was willing to share. Outside of the Swift family home, investigator Terry McCree made a discovery that would later raise suspicions: 7 gallons of bleach. David Swift provided an explanation, saying that the bleach was necessary because of an incident involving his dogs. A neighbor of the Swifts, John Hogshuter, had been arrested on the same day as Karen's disappearance on charges of animal cruelty. He was accused of poisoning the Swifts' dogs along with other neighborhood pets. Hogshuter later claimed that the poisoning had been accidental, asserting that he didn't even know what the Swifts' dogs looked like. According to Hogshuter, he had placed fly killer around his property to deal with the flies that had gathered around construction materials in his yard. David had used the bleach to clean up the vomit left by the poisoned dogs. Though this seemed to satisfy investigators initially, the bleach was not taken into evidence, but Hogshuter's involvement in Karen's disappearance became a point of interest. While McCree searched the property, he also discovered divorce papers tucked under a tire in the back of David's vehicle. The papers that Karen handed David indicated that their marriage was in the process of being divorced. As the days turned into weeks and there were no signs of Karen, detectives grew increasingly frustrated. They asked David Swift to return to the station for another round of questioning. By this time, David had provided multiple versions of the events surrounding the last time he saw his wife. His stories varied in minor but significant ways. Initially, he claimed he hadn't actually seen Karen, only spoken to her from the top of the stairs. Later, he said that he had indeed seen her, though he couldn't remember what she was wearing. In his most recent account, he offered more detail, saying he saw her clearly and could describe her clothing. The inconsistencies were subtle but concerning, and they only deepened the investigators' suspicion. As the interview came to an end, David inquired about the state of the investigation. He was told that the search for Karen was still ongoing, though progress was slow. The case continued to drag on for months with few new leads. However, a breakthrough came when Trooper Jason Page made a significant discovery. 2 cell phones were found in a wooded area 145 feet off Hardness Road, approximately 500 feet from the Swift family home. Both phones, Karen's regular Verizon phone and the second secret phone, known as the Voyager, were recovered in close proximity to each other, between the location of Karen's abandoned vehicle and her home. The cell phone data turned out to be crucial. Investigators learned that David had installed a signal extender in the family home, a device that boosted cellular signals in their rural area. This extender automatically connected any phone within its range, logging the time and date of each connection. Through this data, detectives were able to establish a timeline. Karen's Verizon phone connected to the extender just after 2 a.m. on October 30, confirming that she had returned home with her daughter Ashley after picking her up from the sleepover. The phone disconnected from the extender at 4:38 a.m., indicating it had left the house. By 5:09 a.m., the phone had gone off the network entirely and was never turned on again. When it was discovered, the phone had been partially crushed, perhaps run over or smashed against the ground. Witnesses first reported seeing Karen's vehicle pulled over on the roadside just minutes later, around 5:15 a.m. The second phone, the Voyager, presented even more puzzling clues. It also connected to the house's signal extender, but at 9:55 a.m., a full 5 hours after Karen's main phone had been turned off. At that time, a single call was made from the Voyager to check the phone's voicemail. Shortly afterward, this phone also ended up discarded in the same wooded area as Karen's primary phone. The fact that both phones were found together so close to the Swift house raised unsettling questions. The Bonas, who had given Karen the Voyager phone, explained to investigators that they had done so to help her communicate privately with her divorce attorney. They said that David had been controlling and sought to monitor Karen's every move. They had also lent her money to hire the attorney and file for divorce. While the phones provided valuable information, the case remained unsolved for several more weeks. Then, on December 10, 2011, a critical discovery was made. John Robinson, a preacher at the Boga Church of Christ, along with his friend Mark Rickman, were leaving Blado Cemetery when they noticed something unusual beneath a thick cover of kudzu vines. Upon closer inspection, they realized they had found human remains. The cemetery, less than 3 miles from the Swift home, was a remote and overgrown area, making it an ideal location to conceal a body. Investigators were quickly called to the scene, and an autopsy confirmed that the remains belonged to Karen Swift. The condition of the body indicated that Karen had likely been killed elsewhere and dragged to the spot where she was found. Her clothing was largely absent, with only her undergarments pushed below her knees, suggesting that they may have been pulled down while her body was dragged across the gravel pathway into the kudzu. Despite the condition of the body, the autopsy revealed no clear signs of sexual assault, and the exact cause of death was difficult to determine due to decomposition. However, it was clear that Karen's death had been the result of a violent attack. After weeks of searching, when Karen Swift's remains were finally discovered, the medical examiner was unable to definitively state her exact cause of death due to the state of decomposition. However, the examination revealed that Karen had sustained blunt force trauma to the head. The pathologist determined that the blow was delivered with a heavy, unknown object while Karen was against a hard surface. This injury would have been fatal if Karen were alive at the time it was inflicted, which strongly suggested that the attack had been intentional and violent. The case, which had been treated as a missing person investigation, was officially reclassified as a homicide, though the weapon used to kill Karen was never recovered. David Swift, Karen's husband, remained the primary suspect in the investigation. From the beginning, investigators found it suspicious that David never participated in the searches for his wife. His behavior was peculiar, yet despite their suspicions, detectives could not find any concrete evidence. The search of the family home, property, and vehicles did not yield any clues that pointed to where the fatal blow might have taken place. Furthermore, during interviews, David showed no signs of physical injury, no scratches, bruises, or any other indication that he had been in a struggle with Karen. Investigators also noted that Karen had no foreign DNA under her fingernails, which would have suggested a fight against an attacker. An additional complication for the investigation came from David's well-documented knee injury. Earlier that year, in April 2011, David had injured his left knee and undergone surgery to repair it. Just 3 days before Karen's disappearance, a co-worker witnessed David's knee give out in the hallway at work, causing him to collapse to the floor. For days before, and many following Karen's death, David was reportedly reliant on crutches and unable to put the full weight of his body on his injured leg. This created a major puzzle for the investigators. If David was physically incapacitated, how could he have committed such a brutal murder? Nevertheless, despite the apparent physical limitations posed by his knee injury, David's inconsistencies and the tension surrounding their divorce kept him under scrutiny. investigators delved into other aspects of David's life and the people connected to the Swifts. Among those whose actions were closely examined were Bill and Kathy Bona, close friends of Karen, and their neighbor John Hogshuter. Each of these individuals had been in Karen's orbit at the time of her death, and their behaviors seemed suspicious enough to merit deeper investigation. Kathy Bona's 40th birthday party, which Karen had attended shortly before her death, also became a focus of investigators. At the party, multiple guests, including Karen, were reported to have undressed and spent time in a hot tub together. David Swift mentioned this event several times during his interviews with police, implying that Karen might have been physically involved with others at the party. While there was no solid proof that these interactions had anything to do with Karen's murder, investigators considered the possibility that they could have contributed to David's growing anger and jealousy, providing a potential motive. Meanwhile, the peculiar behavior of their neighbor, John Hogshuter, added another layer of intrigue to the case. Hogshuter had been arrested for allegedly poisoning neighborhood pets, including the Swifts' dogs, though he claimed the poisoning was accidental. On the same day that Karen disappeared, she had confronted Hogshuter about the incident, which had left her visibly upset. After her death, other strange occurrences were reported in the neighborhood. One of the Swifts' sons, Dustin, recounted a disturbing encounter with a man near Blado Cemetery not long before Karen's body was found there. The man was using a metal detector and claimed he was exercising in the cemetery. When questioned further, the man said he was searching for a lost watch. Odd, as Dustin had noticed the man was already wearing a watch. This strange encounter, though not directly linked to Karen's death, added to the cloud of mystery surrounding the case. As years passed without any arrest, speculation about Karen's murder only grew, both in the media and among the local community. The Swift family eventually left Dyersburg, and David remarried and relocated to Jefferson County, Alabama. However, public pressure on Tennessee authorities to charge someone for Karen's murder remained. Investigators, including Terry McCree, continued to review the case file, building a theory that kept pointing back to David Swift. They believed that, driven by anger over Karen's decision to file for divorce and feeling a loss of control, David began plotting his wife's murder in the days leading up to her death. One of the most troubling elements of this theory was the possibility that David had faked the severity of his knee injury to create an alibi. Investigators speculated that his collapse at work, witnessed by his co-worker, might have been staged to give the impression that he was physically incapable of carrying out a murder. According to this theory, David's anger over Karen attending a Halloween party with Bill and Kathy Bona, instead of having dinner with him, further fueled his rage. It was believed that Karen was attacked while she slept, as there were no defensive wounds, and she may have been caught completely off guard. However, investigators found it difficult to determine exactly where the fatal blow had been delivered, as no signs of a violent struggle were found in the bedroom or elsewhere in the home. Adding to the complexity of the case, it was theorized that David may have moved their daughter Ashley, who had been sleeping in the same bed as Karen, to another room before attacking his wife. This would have ensured that the child would not be awakened by the violence. Though strangulation was suspected as a means of subduing Karen, the true nature of the attack remained unclear due to the lack of evidence. Karen Swift's body was dragged into the garage, investigators believed, where she received the fatal blow to her head. This injury, inflicted with a blunt object, was likely delivered as she lay against a hard surface. After incapacitating her, David Swift allegedly placed her either in his vehicle or hers, and then drove the 3 miles to Blado Cemetery, where he discarded her body beneath a thick tangle of vines. This area, obscured by kudzu and undergrowth, was isolated enough that her remains would not be easily spotted, but still close enough to the Swift home to make the trip plausible within the timeline detectives were piecing together. In an effort to understand the sequence of events that followed, detectives reconstructed the route that David might have taken that night. They speculated that, after leaving Karen's body in the cemetery, he returned to the house to set the stage for her apparent disappearance. David, according to this theory, wanted it to look as if Karen had gone out alone, only to have car trouble in the early morning hours. To make this scenario seem believable, he punctured one of her tires using an old screw he found in the garage and let the air out, creating the illusion of a flat tire. Then, around 4:40 a.m., just minutes after Karen's phone disconnected from the home signal extender, He drove her Nissan to a location not far from the house, but far enough that it would look like she had been stranded. On his way, David allegedly disposed of her primary phone, a Verizon device, by tossing it into the woods. However, Karen had a second secret cell phone, her Voyager, hidden in a downstairs bedroom, likely unknown to David at the time. Investigators suspected that David discovered this second phone after returning from disposing of the first. He must have searched for it in a panic, ransacking the room in the process, and once he found it, he accessed its voicemail and went through the contents. Evidence showed that a call was made to check the voicemail at approximately 9:55 a.m., the morning after Karen disappeared, long after her first phone had gone off the network. Once David was finished with the phone, he drove back out to the woods where he had disposed of the Verizon phone and dropped the Voyager nearby, ensuring both devices were discovered together. Before calling Karen's friends and feigning concern over her disappearance, investigators theorized that David cleaned the garage using the 7 gallons of bleach found outside the house. It was this bleach that led detectives to believe he may have sanitized the crime scene, removing any traces of evidence. David's behavior during the early days of Karen's disappearance seemed calculated to mislead those around him. He reached out to friends, neighbors, and the police, acting as though he had no idea what could have happened to his wife. But his unusual calmness and lack of active participation in search efforts raised red flags for many. In July 2023, over a decade after Karen's murder, David Swift was finally arrested in Alabama and extradited to Tennessee. He was indicted on charges of first-degree murder, though it was unclear what new evidence, if any, had emerged that prompted prosecutors to take action after so many years of silence. No new witnesses had come forward, and analysis of the phone data and forensics had remained largely stagnant since 2011. However, the case was built primarily on circumstantial evidence, which, when pieced together, painted a damning picture of David's involvement in his wife's death. As the trial began, the prosecution leaned heavily on testimonies from Karen's friends and acquaintances, who recounted numerous instances of David's controlling behavior. Some of them recounted how David stalked Karen, watching her every move, becoming increasingly paranoid about her socializing, especially with the bonus. One neighbor of Bill and Kathy Bona testified that she had caught David spying on their property from her backyard, peering into their home on multiple occasions. David, when confronted about this, claimed that the neighbor had invited him to watch what was happening at the Bonus's house, an explanation that was met with skepticism. Kathy Bona provided some of the most damning testimony, recounting how David had repeatedly confronted Karen about her alleged behavior, accusing her of infidelity and wild partying. She detailed instances where David had called Karen obsessively, monitoring her whereabouts and interrogating her about her time spent with friends. Kathy also described the night of her 40th birthday party, when Karen was found naked and passed out in the Bonus's living room after drinking heavily. Bill Bona testified that he and a friend covered Karen with a towel and contacted David to pick her up. Karen's friend Robin disputed this version of events, adding more confusion to the timeline. But the incident painted a picture of a marriage strained by jealousy and mistrust, in addition to testimony about David's behavior. The prosecution introduced evidence that David had lied about key details. One of the most significant revelations was the fact that David had called Karen's secret Voyager phone multiple times before her death, despite claiming that he had only recently discovered its existence. This was a critical point because the prosecution argued that David had been well aware of Karen's secret communications, likely with her divorce attorney, and that this knowledge had further fueled his rage. Moreover, David had claimed he was asleep between 2 a.m. and 10 a.m., the morning Karen disappeared. Yet, forensic evidence from his computer and phone showed that someone had been awake in the early hours, around 3 a.m., downloading photos of Karen, including images of her new tattoo. This contradicted his statement and raised doubts about his alibi. Additional evidence painted a picture of David's state of mind after Karen's disappearance. Despite his wife's sudden and mysterious absence, David was found to have accessed dating websites and viewed women's profiles over 250 times in the days immediately following her disappearance. This behavior, the prosecution argued, showed a lack of concern and emotional detachment from the situation, which contrasted starkly with the actions of a grieving husband. A physical therapist who had treated David for his knee injury testified that while David's mobility was restricted, he could have physically dragged Karen's body. In support of this, a neighbor testified that David had moved heavy hay bales the day before Karen disappeared, despite claiming to rely on crutches. The neighbor said that David had lifted bales weighing around 65 pounds without any visible discomfort or assistance. Yet the very next day at the police station, David seemed entirely dependent on his crutches, suggesting he may have exaggerated his injury to avoid suspicion, despite the defense's efforts. The weight of the circumstantial evidence presented by the prosecution left little room for doubt in the minds of many. David Swift's behavior, both before and after Karen's disappearance, combined with the timeline and contradictions in his story, suggested a calculated effort to cover up his involvement in her murder. As the trial progressed, the jury would have to weigh the available evidence and testimony to determine whether David Swift had indeed taken his wife's life in a cold, premeditated act of violence, or if the years of suspicion had simply piled up against an innocent man. The prosecutor argued that in order for Karen to leave on her own, a series of highly unlikely events had to occur. First, she would have needed plans to meet someone, yet there was no evidence of any such arrangements, no texts, calls, or other indications that she intended to leave that night. More puzzling was the idea that she would have moved both of her daughters, Ashley from her own bed and Key from her husband David's bed, before sneaking out. If she was truly sneaking out, why would she take the risk of waking David by moving the children? This point seemed especially important because Karen had reportedly taken a Benadryl before going to sleep that night. Benadryl, commonly used as a sleep aid, would have made her drowsy, so why would she have deliberately taken a sedative if she had planned to leave the house within just a few hours? The defense, however, attempted to undermine all prosecutorial theories by highlighting key inconsistencies. They pointed to David's physical limitations due to his leg injury, which had required surgery both before and after Karen's death. David, according to his defense team, would not have been able to physically overpower Karen or dispose of her body. They also brought forward testimony from David and Karen's daughter Ashley, now an adult, who firmly testified that it was her mother who moved her from her bed to her sister's room that night, not her father. Ashley's testimony was clear and direct. "Yes, I remember her moving me in the middle of the night to my sister's room," she stated on the stand. When asked if she had been moved into the bed with her sister, she confirmed, "Yes." The bedroom, Ashley explained, was directly beside her parents' room, which aligned with the timeline proposed by the defense. Her account raised questions about whether David could have orchestrated the crime without waking the children or causing any noticeable disturbance. One of the weakest aspects of the prosecution's case was the lack of physical evidence. Despite extensive forensic analysis of the house, vehicles, and David himself, nothing definitive tied him to the crime. There were no signs of struggle in the house, no DNA evidence, and no fingerprints linking David to the alleged murder scene. Investigators were unable to match the rusty screw used to puncture the tire of Karen's SUV to any tool or item found in the Swift garage. David's defense lawyer seized on these weaknesses during the trial, emphasizing the lack of concrete evidence. When the jury returned from their deliberations, the outcome surprised many in the courtroom. David Swift was found not guilty of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and attempted first- and second-degree murder. However, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision on the charge of voluntary manslaughter. After hours of deliberation, they informed the judge that they were hopelessly deadlocked on this count, leaving the question of manslaughter unresolved. His legal team argued that retrying the manslaughter charge would be illegal, as the statute of limitations had already passed. However, on July 11, 2024, a judge ruled against dismissing the charge, allowing the prosecution to continue its efforts to secure a conviction. The date for the new trial has yet to be set, but it promises to reignite the legal battle.